Hello, everyone. Welcome to a webinar for the startups interested in Korean healthcare ecosystem, co-sponsored by the Swiss Embassy of South Korea and the Swiss Healthcare Startups. I'm Sunny Min, the Innovation Scout at the Swiss Embassy here in Seoul, South Korea. And I'll be your moderator for the webinar. This webinar is to be specifically catered to startups in healthcare or digital healthcare that are interested in Korean market. I have the honor to introduce to you Dr. Chiwon Kim as our speaker today. He is one of the most sought after experts and advisors for the startups here in Korea, as he was one of the key advisors in the success of the startup Noom. He has quite a wide range of experience. He is an internal medicine doctor. He has a degree in public health, specifically in policy management, and worked as a consultant in McKinsey, covering projects in biomedicine, IT, sports, defense, etc. Then he was a strategist for a major hospital and also advised Samsung subsidiaries in healthcare business. One covers the business models and development for digital healthcare startups. And now he's the CEO of Seoul Convalescent Hospital. Hello, Dr. Kim. Thank you very much for your time and expertise.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me over to this wonderful event. Today, I'm going to focus on the overall the healthcare system in Korea. And then from that point, I'm going to develop into what it means for the Korean digital healthcare ecosystem. So first, let me give you an overview of the South Korean healthcare system. I'm going to break it down in terms of access, financing, and provider side, and then the government side. So first off, the access. So basically, all the Korean people are covered by mandatory national health insurance system. I think it's almost similar in Swiss as well as other European countries. And we don't have any major issue in terms of accessibility to medicine. So, I mean, for example, it's really easy to see like the specialist doctors in Korea. In most part of the Korea, if you just walk for like 5 to 10 minutes and then wait for another 5 to 10 minutes, you can easily see one specialist like internists or pediatricians. So the accessibility is fantastic, unlike in most other countries. So, I mean, but there still has some kind of caveat, but let me cover it later. And in terms of financing, as I mentioned, we have national health insurance system. So basically, this government agency collects money from you, and then they run the whole national health insurance system in Korea. And the most important feature of this financing system is that it is basically low contribution, low benefit model. What it means is that usually your out-of-pocket expense is usually 1/3 to almost, it goes up to like 40% of total medical bill. So it's quite high compared to most other developed countries. And it means that certain areas are not covered well. For example, like MRI, some of the MRIs or ultrasound scans. And when you use like private rooms in hospital, most of them are not covered by national health insurance. It should come out of your pocket. And NHIS, National Health Insurance System, covers like 40 to 70% of outpatient bills and around 80% of inpatient bills. So the overall fees for the insurance covered items are set pretty low compared to other countries. Let me cover it in the next slide. And in terms of providers, the for-profit medical institutions are not allowed in Korea. So basically, it is either founded by an individual doctors, or it could only be founded by non-for-profit institutions. We do have, in theory, we do have 3-tier healthcare system, but we don't really have the real gatekeeping system in Korea. So what happens is that one day you just want to see the best doctor, the best professor in one of the biggest hospitals in Korea, you can just do that. You just go to one of the small clinic and then ask the doctor to write a letter for yourself. And then you just get the letter and then go to the large hospital. And it is easy like that. And another feature is that even for providers, the subscription to national health insurance is mandatory. So as long as you operate your hospitals in Korea, you have to take patients with national health insurance system. So there is no real negotiation between the national health insurance system and doctors. You just have to take the price they offer. So another feature is that up to 95% of doctors are specialists. So we have kind of a shortage of primary care physicians. But still, in Korea, like doctors like myself, the internists sometimes act as a primary care physician. And lastly, we depend a lot on private sector. Almost 90% of providers are basically private. And in terms of the role of government, as you can imagine, as I mentioned, there is no real negotiation between the providers and the national health insurance. So basically, government has very strong influence in the overall policy and the price setting and everything. And that's the reason why basically the Korean doctors show a lot of distrust for the government. So here is some statistics about South Korean healthcare system. So it basically shows that, could you just focus on the last column, the rightmost column, and it basically shows that about 1/3 of overall medical bill are paid for by out-of-pocket expenses, which means that it is much higher than other countries among OECD countries. I mean, this is Korean, but the red bar means OECD average, and the blue bar is Korea. So the countries below Korea in terms of out-of-pocket expense is only Greece, Mexico, and Latvia. So compared to most other developed countries, that out-of-pocket expense proportion is pretty high. So what happens is that in Korea, as I mentioned before, the medical fee is set pretty low in Korea. For example, in the last column, you can see it with regards to the C-section and cataract operation and appendectomy. The Korean medical fee is lower than US, of course. I mean, US has the most expensive medical system in the world, but still compared to countries like Spain, the Korean medical fee is pretty lower to them. So even in Korea, when doctors complain about the national health insurance system, we tend to say that if you do an operation on dogs in the veterinarians, it usually is much higher than fees for people. And what it means for doctors is that since the fee is set pretty low, what Korean doctors tend to do is we make up for it by increasing the volume of medical care. I mean, basically in economics, we say that the output is determined by volume, price, and quantity, right? So since the government sets the price really low, doctors make up for it by increasing the volume. So for example, in terms of medical resources, here on the left side, the number of beds per 1,000 people. The Korea has much like 2 times more beds than OECD average, a little bit, yeah. And then in terms of number of outpatient visits per person is the largest among OECD countries. So it is, I mean, it's not just about doctors, right? I mean, doctors may encourage this lots of utilization, but what happens is that Korean people get used to this kind of system. So let me connect it to the other factor which I mentioned before, which is that we don't really have gatekeeping system. So what results is that people tend to visit doctors with ease, really easily. Like even for some common cold, they can easily visit the primary care physicians without much price. And what happens is that as a result, in an outpatient setting, usually the outpatient consultation time per patient averages 3 to 5 minutes, which is much lower than other countries. And for physicians to even break even, they need to see like more than 70 patients per day just to be profitable. So in this regard, Korea has a really excellent accessibility only with limited time, face time with doctors. And the other thing that happens in Korea is that doctors tend to focus on the insurance, the uncovered areas where they can charge whatever they want, and the ancillary services really flourish. For example, uncovered areas, still lots of MRI scans are not covered by NHIS, and among OECD countries, Korea ranks fourth with regards to number of MRI machines per capita. And the premium health checkup system really has a boon in Korea. It is really large, the money maker. So for large hospitals, this kind of premium health checkup has a margin of 30 to 40%. And at the hospital where I worked as a strategist, the only profit that comes out of the healthcare system itself is only from premium health checkup. For other covered areas, it doesn't really make money. So for the premium health checkups, there are like so-called big four hospitals in Korea, and its cost is as large as, even for like really VIPs, it goes up to like $20,000. And also plastic surgery, dermatology care, and procedures like LASIK in ophthalmology are all not covered, and they are highly developed in countries. So we attract lots of patients from countries like China and the Eastern Russia and some other, the Central Asian countries like Mongolia and Kazakhstan, as we have highly developed the specialty in plastic surgery and dermatology care. And in terms of ancillary services, what I mean is that usually funeral hall, even parking lots, really huge revenue source for hospitals. And the medical reimbursement system, as I mentioned, is really made up by the volume, right? So it basically has driven arms race among hospitals, and which resulted in emergence of big four or big five hospitals. For example, the biggest hospital in Korea, the Asan Medical Center, has almost 2,700 beds. So even the smallest one has like 1,300 beds. So it's really much huger than the most prestigious hospitals in the US, right? So when I mentioned like there's one hospital which has 2,700 beds, and people are really amazed. So the biggest one, the Asan Medical Center, covers almost 10% of all the cancer surgeries in Korea. So the number of cancers, in terms of the number of cancer surgeries, the AMC do like 18,000 surgeries per year, which is much larger than other prestigious hospitals in US, like MSKCC or MD Anderson. So the proportion of the overall medical fees taken by these large hospitals are getting larger and larger every year. So, but as you can see, there are some good points and bad points about Korean healthcare system. So the current government is trying to change the system for the better. So first, the government is trying to increase the coverage ratio of national health insurance. They are trying to, currently the 2/3 are covered by national health insurance, and they want to increase it to around 70%. And the economics of the scheme is that they're basically get more funding from government budget. But what they're doing is that the government is kind of trying to slash the price for covered services. What I mean is that as they increase the coverage itself, for example, if they add more MRI services into the covered areas, and that's gonna increase the whole fees, right? So what government trying to do is that still slash more the prices further so that the overall burden on any national health insurance would be minimal. And then, which will result to the doctor's response, which means that the doctors are opposed to the overall scheme. And combined with the deep-rooted mistrust towards government, we had a very vigorous strike from physicians this year. The second progress, the second change is being made is about the health delivery system. As I mentioned, there is no real health delivery system in Korea, no gatekeeping systems. So what the government wants to do is that they want to make they set up a certain health delivery system, but it's really hard because people are used to this kind of the free system, right? Not just doctors, but the patients themselves. If someone is going to set up a gatekeeping system, it's going to make harder for them to visit whatever hospital they want, right? So it's going to be really tricky system and it's not coming easy. So in terms of digital healthcare regulations, the most striking feature is that the telemedicine between doctors and patients are not allowed. Only between doctors are allowed in Korea. So the doctor to patient telemedicine service is illegal. Of course, the tentatively during COVID-19 pandemic area, it is tentatively allowed, but overall, it is still illegal. So telemonitoring is kind of like a legally gray area. What the government has said is that the passive data collection is legal, but if a physician actively feedback, it could be illegal. So it's a little bit of legal gray zone. And the national health insurance system is still not favorable towards digital healthcare. And we have the KFDA, similar to US FDA, and then they are getting more progressive and they tend to follow US FDA. It still lags behind the US ones, but they are trying to be more progressive. And I can give you some other advantages of Korea healthcare system. And we have really strong clinical trial infrastructure. So among the major countries like you see here, Korea ranks 8th last year in terms of the number of clinical trials being done in the country. It used to be almost as high as like 3rd or 4th, but still it is ranked among the top 10 countries. And second, as I mentioned, usually those non-covered areas are really strong in Korea. We have highly developed system. So we have really competitive commercial practices. So for example, it's about this table is about the aesthetic surgeries. So in terms of surgical or non-surgical procedures, Korea, with much lower population than US or Brazil, still has a lot of procedures done within the country. And in terms of this graph, this picture shows how many Da Vinci robotic surgery machine each country has. So compared to most other countries, even among Asian countries, Korea ranks right next to Japan. But Japan has like 2.5 more 5 people to Korea. So in terms of per capita, Korea has really lots of the Da Vinci machines. And another thing that, as I kind of mentioned this before, but in terms of other areas like the cosmetic laser, dermatologic procedures, and dental area, we have lots of advanced medical device companies, and major uncovered areas cover items like plastic surgery, dermatological procedures, LASIK, and dental. And within dental, I mean the orthodontics and implants, and even IVF. IVF is the in vitro fertilization service. So all these areas are really highly developed in Korea. In conclusion, for those of you who might be interested in doing some business or doing some R&D in Korea, Korea is an excellent destination if your business is about those uncovered areas like plastic surgery or orthodontics, etc. And if you'd like to run a quality clinical trial, still Korea could be a really wonderful destination. As I mentioned, just one hospital covers like 10% of the whole cancer patients in Korea. So if you can include like the big 5 hospitals in Korea, you can cover pretty much the upper bounds of 50% of overall cancer patients in Korea. There's no such country you can find such a country elsewhere. And since we have such a database within each hospitals, if you'd like to develop quality AI, the data model, it could be a pretty good destination. So, but as I mentioned, if you're really interested in doing a business itself in the covered area, Korea might not be an excellent choice for you.
Dr. Kim, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, let's talk in terms of business model. So, or business development, if you will. In your book on digital healthcare, you've listed some factors that make it difficult for the companies to really make it in the real world with B2C model. Well, this doesn't only apply to companies in Korea. I think it applies to many companies in all over the world. Can you tell us more about that and how the startups can sort of go around that obstacles, if you will?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I'm not sure if I can deliver it perfectly in English about that topic, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
The biggest issue is that even you or myself or people are not used to paying for healthcare out of your pocket, right?
Okay.
I mean, usually the major ones are covered by insurance.
Right.
I mean, you have to pay your co-insurance or some portion, but if you have to pay the whole stuff for out of your pocket, you're not just used to it. So people tend not to do that. So let me give you an example. The Noom, right? Which I know
The infamous.
Yeah, I mean, I have to compare two companies. There's a Noom and there's Umada.
Okay.
Yeah, both of them are basically about weight management stuff. Yeah, using usually apps and some people coach and they help you slim down, right? And then both of them has an authorization from the US, the Center for Disease Control, as a diabetes prevention program provider. Basically, it means that if you are overweight, if you cut down your weight by 5 to 10%, it reduces your chance of becoming diabetic. That's the basic of the whole program. So both of them have the credential from the CDC. And then, but the critical difference between these two companies is that Umada is going for DPP itself. And then they go after B2B model. And Noom is only saying, it doesn't really say about DPP, even though it has its credentials. It only says that we are weight loss company.
Right.
We are a company for diet.
It's a platform. It provides a platform for weight management, correct? If I understand.
But only says about weight management. So it's more like a cosmetic. It doesn't really mention diabetes at all. And then they go after B2C. What I mean is that once you say diabetes, people won't pay you.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you want to go after consumers, you have to mention otherwise.
So you have to be more general.
More general, or
to.
Because I mean, people already spend a lot of money on diet, right?
I see.
Yeah, but they never, even though they are exactly the same service, you never spend your money on something like diabetes, pre-diabetes, or hypertension.
That's true. Okay.
So what I want to point out is that you have to really pick out the area really well. For example, if you there are certain areas where people already spend their money on within the healthcare sphere, like the diet area, right? And then the aesthetics and some fitness area. And there are another area where people would like to spend, even though it's purely healthcare, is that if you want to avoid some kind of embarrassment, you might want to spend money. For example, for hair loss or further like erectile dysfunction. Yeah, you know that you can see a doctor and get a prescription and go to a pharmacist, but you want to avoid that situation. So there are some companies like, I mean, it is totally illegal in Korea, but in the US, there are companies like, I mean, you might have heard of this company, like companies like Hims or Hers, and they do this service. They offer from the telemedicine itself. So, I mean, you don't even have to do a Zoom with your doctor.
So it's
you want to avoid it.
So it's like an ad. So it's kind of similar to ordering, let's say, self-help book on Amazon, because you don't want to go to the bookstore and actually,
or even sex books,
show the clerk that you're buying this kind of books. So it works in a similar way.
It's sort of like that.
Okay.
And then what happens is that you don't even need to see a doctor over Zoom for their service. You just fill out certain questionnaire, and then doctor will review that and give you a prescription. And with the prescription, would you like to go to a pharmacy? No, you want to get it delivered, right? So you don't even have to go to a pharmacist. They get the drug delivered to your doorstep.
And that's legal in the US.
That's legal. Yeah, every step is legal in the United States.
Okay, but that works because even if the patient were to see a doctor, for that matter, there isn't. I mean, do they have to go through any like clinical exam where they actually have to see the patient?
Legally, in most US states, you don't have to.
Okay.
It doesn't even have to simultaneous consultation, even via telemedicine in lots of states in the United States.
Okay, so they found that sort of loophole in that system. That's great. Okay. Are there any other challenges if they were to do B2C model? I mean, Noom and this his and hers app, or products, they did a great job of actually finding out the niche area, right? Okay. So the companies, if they haven't done that, there's an obstacle to actually get through the general public to get their business.
There's another point, is that if you really want to, I mean, it's really hard to do B2C in healthcare, as you know. I'd rather just go to B2B with medical device rather than B2C. If you really want to do that, another thing to keep in mind is that with regards to digital healthcare, is that you have to think about how people, your consumer, will think about your pricing scheme. For example, so there are usually 3 models for pricing. The one is that the cost plus, it is based on they think about how much it will cost to get the service, and then plus they want to pay a little bit more than that. And then plus and value plus and the comparison with your competitors. And then the other is value, based on value. So what happens is that the competitor, you don't really have many competitors in digital healthcare. We are not widespread.
So far,
So it's really hard for your consumer to compare your price to other competitors. It doesn't exist at all. So, and then in terms of value, it's usually hard for consumers to calculate all the values your product might have. Like, for example, if you use this diabetes prevention program, your chance of getting diabetes over 10 years will be reduced by 30%.
But
and
how
it
do
will give you like
put money on that?
Insurance might understand that, but you don't understand it. You only think about tomorrow, or as the far away as like next year, but not like 10 years, right? So the only scheme that you can go after is cost plus. So your consumers think about how much it costs to build this specific service or product, right? So there's a catch, because if it's a purely digital service, it's really hard to sell, right? Now you are paying for services like Netflix, right? But it hasn't happened for a long time. It's really hard to persuade your consumers into buying purely digital service. So even for Noom, exactly that happened. So when Noom tried to persuade your consumers to pay for their digital app, people
there's a resistance.
So what happened was that what happened for the Noom is that they changed their product slightly into combining the human coaches behind their apps. So now the game is different because it's not purely digital. There's people behind it.
It's more of a tangible service that you're getting rather than just looking at the app, right?
So if you have some kind of hardware combined or some kind of people's time combined, then people might be
something we can easily translate into
your
cost. So mixing up with that might help.
That might help a lot.
I see. Can you tell us more? Can you tell us on the B2B models that you think might be more accessible or more feasible for startups? Can you think of some?
I mean, I think
applicable.
The really hard part is what you mean by feasible. But what I usually say is that you'd rather go after more the medical device part. What I mean by that is that I talk to lots of startups in Korea, and what they seem to think is that they tend to think that digital healthcare is somewhat different from pure medical device and still different from pure B2C device.
Okay.
They kind of think that there's a third way between them.
Okay.
What I tend to say is that there's no such way. You should choose either B2C or pure medical device.
Okay.
Yeah. Because people don't know how to pay for something different. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So for B2B, you can sort of target in case of South Korea, you can target, let's say, major hospitals or major companies or even insurance companies. Well, not inside of Korea. For insurance companies, it might be applicable to countries other than Korea, but they might be more likely to accept the product if you can sort of monetize the value of it. And I have a feeling that they might be more open to the interpretation of the product in numbers. I think could that be one of the factors?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you did talk about Noom briefly. And for those of you who don't know Noom, it's a platform, as Dr. Kim said, it caters to weight management, but they smartly figure out the way to get approved by US CDC, and it's gotten huge success, I believe. What were other than what you've already mentioned, what were the key factors of Noom that led to the success, and what that could be also beneficial to our audience that are watching?
Let me just say that when I first talked to the CEO of Noom, and I asked him a question. So there are lots of companies doing similar things, right? Even in Korea, like companies like the large conglomerates, large companies are after this area.
Right.
Maybe not specifically about the weight management, but something similar like diabetes or hypertension, or they all want to do something similar. And I asked him a question. So among all those competitors, how could you have managed come this far? And then I really didn't expect that much out of that question. It's more like a customary. But his question really amazed me. His answer really amazed me. And what his answer was that basically ever since he founded his own company in like 2010, his company has updated the app every week.
Okay.
Yeah. It means a lot.
Wow.
What it basically says is that the big companies can do that. Yeah, at least in Korean large companies, what's going to happen is that, you are in charge of the project, and then you want to update the app, and you want to draft the document, and then report it to your superior, and the superior, and someone just threw it away. It's going to take forever before you update your app, right? But every week, it's really hard. And what they have done is that, for example, one of the key areas that Noom was after in terms of their improvement is that people, the Noom, its basic function is about getting a diary about the food diary, about what you ate. And then their basic focus was that if it takes more than 40 seconds to keep a diary about your one meal, people tend to leave the platform. That's their learning. So their major focus is how to reduce the time between 40 seconds and things like that. Yeah.
So little things, little feedbacks that they get.
And another lesson that I got from that answer is that in terms of the manufacturing hardware, the big companies rule. They know how to make a perfect product. So once the product is out, it's really hard to update or change it, right? So you have to be perfect the moment you take it out to the market. But app, we don't really have the plan or the success model for what successful app is, right? We don't really know the answer. So what you can do is that you basically update regularly and really often. And then in that sense, you can have an advantage over large companies.
I see. I think that's a good point for our startups, I hope. Are there any questions? Okay. Well, then let's talk about Korean ecosystem a little bit. So what I know is that Korean government is very encouraging many startups to. I mean, they're investing a lot in these startups, right? It's one of the big policies, right? So. So there is that. There is government support that we can sort of rely on, and then when dealing with the investors of Korea, do you have any tips for these startups?
Oh,
It could be specific to Korean investors, but it doesn't have to be. It could be general as well.
I mean, it's still a little bit tricky because usually the funding source for most of Korean venture capital is from the government arm.
Right.
Yeah. So what happens is that usually they require the startups to be based in Korea.
So the headquarters has to be in Korea?
Usually, yeah, or just incorporated in Korea.
Okay.
Yeah. So sometimes it could be tricky for a foreign company to get a funding from the South Korean VCs, but still there are some like loopholes, because there are I don't know the specifics, but I heard that there are some funds specifically devoted for attracting other foreign companies into Korea. Yeah, there are things like that. So you can have some loophole, but overall it would help if you have
branch
and however small it may be, it would help. Yeah, if you have a small office or
some base in Korea.
Even it doesn't have to have any employee at all. If you just legally
it has to be registered.
Legal entity in Korea.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay. Are there, I mean, for investors in Korea, are there any specific characteristics that are unique?
I haven't met many foreign investors so far, so it's really hard for me to compare them to foreigners. I mean, there are like really, I mean, because of all those startup booms, we have lots of VCs these days. So, I mean, it's really hard to characterize them in one way because there are so many different VCs. So, I mean, if you're really interested in Korea, and then if you have a time to meet lots of different VCs, I think you will be able to meet one that fits you.
Yeah, because I mean, I see all the ads for hiring more and more VCs and everything. So I think there is a lot more capital coming in to the market, and a lot of them are trying to find people to do that. So. Okay, let's talk about telemedicine. So I think it's tricky because of the current legal situation in Korea. You said it's not legal in Korea, but I mean, there is definitely still the movement to try to make that work, correct? Is this something that the foreign companies can sort of look into? I mean, would Korean market be something that foreign companies can look into right now, or is this a bit too early at this point?
So your question is only about the small sense of telemedicine itself, right?
Yes.
So more like a Zoom type of doctor's consultation and stuff.
Or even other communication devices.
Even others.
Yeah.
What I think is that in Korea, even if the doctor to patients telemedicine is legalized, it's gonna be confined to the repeat visits only, rather than new patients. So why it's important is that if you allow the new patient visits, it's gonna foster all those platforms, like for example, like Uber, right? Yeah. So for doctors, these platforms are really important. So they want to direct new patients to you. And as I mentioned, in Korea, it's really competitive among all the hospitals for the patients.
Right.
So there's a platform that's going to get you new patients. The platform's the strength is going to be really strong. And then just because of that, exactly based on that point, I think that the new patients won't be allowed.
I see.
Because they don't want to have another Uber kind of stuff in medicine.
I see.
And especially in Korea, just the mention of for-profit medicine,
then it gets some response.
So it's going to be more about repeat visit, which means that usually telemedicine platforms are going to help doctors see their own patients rather than direct new patients to the doctor.
I see. So it caters to the doctors and the existing patients.
So power of the platform is really limited. Yeah, and then what I think will happen is that those telemedicine companies will be limited to offering like Zoom type of service. It's more like the software as a service kind of plus really good camera maybe. Yeah, that's all they can offer. And then and then for that they charge a certain amount of money every month, but it won't be huge.
I mean, it doesn't really have to. Now that I think about it, it doesn't really have that much of a strength in Korea because we have hospitals everywhere.
Yeah,
and people have so much of an access, like you mentioned. If I'm thinking in the US, yes, if I'm living outside of a major city far, far away, then yes, I could really benefit from that kind of platform. But in Korea, with the public transportation that's that convenient and everything, and
the utility of telemedicine itself is really limited.
Yeah, it doesn't really have that much of a use, I feel.
So among companies, if you haven't tied with Korean doctors, you haven't the foot in doorstep. So companies like EMRs, so they can only offer like a secure line with a camera. You can easily offer telemedicine service, right? So they have really advantage once it's open.
I see. So, okay. So if you're, okay, so be the first one.
So for the others, even among Korean companies, other than like companies like EMRs, it's gonna be not that lucrative or attractive business.
I see. What kind of opportunities do you think they can look into in Korea? So you've mentioned the other services in terms of treatment that are not covered by the insurance. So that's the area that we thrive a lot, right? So so I'm thinking some devices companies in that sort of treatment could really find a good market, and Korea has the power to. I mean, Korea has the name power to our neighboring countries, I feel.
In terms of digital IT.
Yes. So I think that might be a good opportunities for the startups that are looking into Korea. Let's see, anything else? No? Okay. Last chance to submit any questions if you have any. If not, then well, I hope to have given you the informations that you might need that you can use in your business planning and business development. And at this point, I would like to give thanks to Dr. Kim. I'm pretty sure that was very useful to our startups and everything. Having lived outside of Korea for over 2 decades, I feel that we have very strong infrastructure in terms of IT, just like Dr. Kim mentioned. And I think there is a lot that we can offer in terms of developing the product or having providing the test bed in clinical trials and everything. And like he said, once you step into the door, I think you will be welcomed with a lot of connections that you can make in our medical field. So if these things attract you and you'd like to learn more about the system that might provide you an entryway to Asian market, not only the Korean market, I invite you to consider the booster program held in Korea in 2021. The experts and mentors like Dr. Kim will share their knowledge and expertise, and you can find partners to complement your business. And you can apply in February. And with the help of vaccines becoming available soon, we foresee to have the booster camp with many advisors and stakeholders in Korea next fall. Keep checking the Swiss Healthcare Startup website for updates. And with that in mind, I'd like to thank Dr. Kim again for his valuable time and knowledge, and all of you for attending our webinar. And please send us any questions, suggestions, comments, to our email shown on the screen, or you can also check out our website for updates. We have a lot more events, not only in medicine or bioscience, but in any other science sector as well. And please follow us on LinkedIn. And I'm Sunny Min. It's my pleasure to have hosted this webinar, this event, and hope to see you soon.